10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Live from Valencia, this is The Breakfast Show with Krishnasamy.
Good morning, it's 7 a.m. Welcome to The Breakfast Show. I'm Malarvilie Krishnasamy. I'm here every Tuesday, 7 to 8:30 a.m. Coming up, we have John Rees and Amjad Ali. We'll be discussing the run-up to Christmas and what makes good CPD. It's Tuesday morning, and we are live!
Live from Valencia, this is The Breakfast Show with Krishnasamy on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Morning. I have to say, Teachers Talk Radio is growing so fast at the moment. We've got almost 50 team members. That's more than some schools. I know some small schools, they only have about 20 staff. We've got about almost 50 now. We've got some incredibly new, fantastic hosts like Zoe Enser, Emma Williams, Ed Finch, Toby Payne-Cook, Alex Wright, Bisayo Adewale. I mean, it's a really exciting time, and we've got our old staples as well, like Halil and Sobia and so on, and it really is an exciting time at Teachers Talk Radio. Still got a couple of slots left. I think we've got on a Sunday night, 8 o'clock, we've got like one Sunday a month. So there's 4 Sundays. I think 2 are taken, 1 Sunday a month. We'd love somebody to do a show then. And there's a couple of slots here and there, some morning slots as well. So yeah, tune in, talk it out. If you have missed any shows and would like to listen to some more or want to listen to some podcasts, check out the website, www.ttradio. I'm actually typing it in as we talk. www.ttradio.org/listenback. And the great thing about that is you can type into it, there's a search button, and you might think, oh, okay, I want to hear about marking today. I can think of it. Yeah, you might think, yeah, or you might think, oh, I want to hear about leadership. Just type it in, and loads of shows. We have so many shows every day, and they'll guarantee there'll be a show on it. If there's not, message in via the message in and let us know. Oh, I just missed you, John. I saw you call in and I was just about to press the button and disappeared. So call in again. So just message in via the website or email us and just let us know if there's a topic that we haven't discussed yet, and one of us will get on it straight away. Welcome, John. John Rees is in the studio. What a star. I was moaning to him yesterday that, oh no, I've messed up my bookings and I've only got Amjad in at 7:45. And it's going to be me just wittering on for about an hour before Amjad turns up. And he said, "Oh, I'll call in." So yeah, please do call in, John. And I just missed you. So go on, call in, call in. We're going to be discussing a range of things. It'll probably be a little bit serious. You there, John? Be a little bit serious at first. We'll probably we won't go into details, but we'll mention Arthur Lavinjo Hughes. To be honest, I don't think I could go into the details. It's just horrendous. I know of people that have been listening to the news on the way into work and crying. Oh, you pressed it already, John. John says, What do I press? You pressed it already. I just missed you. I wasn't quick off the draw. I'm still half asleep. So press on the there should be a little phone button. So press that. God, I sound croaky today. Go on, John. Press it. Press the button. There we go. Invite. Here we are. Hello, Rumi. Obviously not the Rumi, but John.
Hi, Mal. How are you doing?
Are you with us? Oh,
I'm hoping so.
Yeah. How are you? It's been so long since I've spoken to you.
Since yesterday afternoon, yeah.
So yeah, where I managed to blag you onto the show today.
I tell you what, it's so early. I know lots of teachers get up early and do. There's the 5 o'clock club and lots of. But this is way out of my normal experience. Well, since the start of the pandemic. I'm an independent consultant, so into schools. And
since moving to Spain, it's actually 8 o'clock for me, so I'm over the moon. I mean, because the 7 o'clock, by 8:30, I could just about speak. Because it's just too early for me. But now that it's 8 to 9:30 for me, I'm like, yeah, this is fun. I can do this. This is normal for normal people. I'm gloating again, aren't I?
Well, that's okay, isn't it? That's absolutely fine. I suppose my since lockdown, or since the start of the pandemic, instead of being, I live in Doncaster. Normally, I'd be one day in London, the next day in Manchester, working with schools and so forth. Now that the triangle of my world has shrunk, in that I come downstairs, I take 3 steps to the left, I go into my little office, I sit there for 14, 16, 18 hours, and then I take a few steps to the right, I go and watch a telly with my wife, and then I go back up to bed again. It's fairly restricting. I'm not getting. It
sounds like the Foxtrot or something. I've been watching Strictly last night, so it's like just moving to the right, to the left, kind of thing. Rumi has asked a question. Can I ask, what do you teach lady and the gentleman?
Well, ladies first.
Okay. I'm trying to look around for the lady. No, I used to teach history. My second subject was citizenship. I taught for 20 years, but I'm now I now run training for school leaders. Have I got a child in the No. You have to. I'm live on air. You cannot be in here, boys. All right. Okay. Yeah. So I used to be a teacher, but I'm not anymore. John, over to you.
Well, I would normally introduce myself to people by saying I used to be a slim and curly-haired young PE teacher, and as you'll see from the photos that Teacher Talk Radio have kindly put out about me, I'm no longer either of those things, or any of those 3 things, I suppose. I would call myself an independent consultant. I work with schools across the country and overseas, doing coaching support for teachers. I do a lot of work around personal, social, and health education. But also as part of that, I'm now working with an organisation in Gloucestershire, an unashamed name drop for Headsite Services. We're one of the providers of the DFE-funded mental health leadership training. And that, over the last half term, has taken quite a lot of time. First of all, to put together the course, but also then now doing some coaching with staff who are helping to put together their strategic plans for their school to improve mental health across the school. And that's proved to be really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was
And
actually coaching
dare I say,
somebody.
it, good to see the government putting a little bit of money into that,
Yeah,
but absolutely essential.
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because you can see both of us have left teaching, and but we're still contributing hugely to the welfare of children and teachers and so on. Okay, let's get to it then. Arthur Labinjo Hughes. I've said already that there doesn't need to be a trigger alert. I'm not going to go into the details, partly because I can't. It's just too difficult. But for our international listeners, a 6-year-old boy in the UK was horrifically neglected and abused by his father and stepmother. And last week, the stepmother was sentenced for murder for 29 years, and his father sentenced to 21 years for manslaughter. Now, in the paper over the weekend, the Prime Minister said, "We'll find who failed Arthur so badly." What's your view on this?
Like you, Malarvilie say, I found the details incredibly distressing to read. I suppose first and foremost, our thoughts have to be with the child who suffered such appalling abuse. I suppose almost immediately afterwards, my heart goes out to those adults and professionals, particularly the teachers in this case, who will inevitably now be going through agonies of extraordinary levels of pain. Should I have seen this? What more could I have done? And the simple truth is that it could happen to any of us.
Mm,
I think also it's all very well the government saying we'll find out who failed. Actually, the failure is one of the system. And I know
mm,
that sounds like a bit of a cop out, but for our overseas listeners, this does start to get kind of rather UK centric political. But I think our current government has continued to underfund the National Health Service, teaching unions or teaching and schools. It's continued to cut funding to social care and to local authorities. That the caseloads that some of those people have are just so huge, and we never hear about the thousand that they get right. We only hear
yeah.
about the catastrophes, and as I say, my heart goes out to those professionals and individuals who will have been working with the child, who will inevitably feel, such appalling agonies of maybe we should have spotted this. And as I say, I
Mm.
think the truth is that. There probably were failures. There were probably mistakes made. There were things that should have been referred or noted or passed on or information shared. But actually, it's one of a systemic failure that I think is probably the one we ought to be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, to be honest, when I saw that headline by the Prime Minister, it made me angry actually because I mean, I started teaching year 2000, and in my first school, we had a school counsellor, we had a school nurse, we had a range of learning mentors, and it really was every child matters. No child slipped through the crack, but all of that has gone, all of that has gone. And both you and I were into PSHE, and PSHE made a huge difference to the children that we taught. And all the funding for that went out the window as well, with healthy schools and so on. So I just think with all that funding are taken away, and I know a lot of pressure has been put on teaching assistants to support the mental health of young people. But when you've
Mm.
got over 1,000 kids in a school, how can you? How can you? And it sounds like the school did flag up several times that there's an issue. They're concerned.
Mm. I'm nodding here, Mal, which is probably not
Yeah,
great radio.
not for
But
radio, no.
I suppose that really hard to know.
Have you gone again? You disappeared
Uh,
then.
oh, sorry, I'm still talking. Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay, I can hear you now, but you just disappeared
Oh,
for a
okay.
bit. Okay,
Oh, I'm
so you're
sorry.
about to say
Don't know what happened
something.
there. Yeah, but I wasn't listening. I don't know what. I suppose for me, there's something really important we don't know about um, We don't know about the detail of this, and until there's been an inquiry, it's incredibly hard to comment. But the again, I think it comes back to a systemic approach about what do we think that schools are for. You talked about starting teaching, did you say in 2000?
Yeah.
The priorities then were recognized as being different, and I think we had a different approach to the purpose of education. Schools now are so, but let's take it up until the pandemic, because I think things have changed from there. We tended to focus, as you said, away from the welfare and the well-being and educating what we would say, what we would normally talk about, the whole child. And we seem to have now spent some years focusing just on a few things we think we can measure. And that's fine, and that's a huge part of education, but it's not the only part. And I think we also then have to look at what is it we're trying to enable children to do and to become, and what needs to be done to address that. Since the pandemic, and probably in the years before that, through it's been the UK through austerity and so forth, we have families under such colossal pressure that I think if we only focus on the tip of the iceberg, if we only focus on the academic performance of children, then we're missing a trick. And I appreciate that teachers are not social workers; we're not trained to do those things. But the system around the child needs to provide sufficient services that teachers don't have to do all of those things, but are central to a central plank, which has been a deliberate government policy, and small wonder that we end up with a catastrophe such as this.
Yeah. And I have to say that my heart goes out to all the safeguarding leads out there, because the past few weeks must have been horrific for them, because I think it can be quite triggering for them, in the sense of, they see an awful lot, they go through an awful lot. I could never do it. I could never have been a safeguarding lead, because I just think I'm just way too emotional. And I had a kid cry at me once because his parents had a row in the morning, and it was first thing in the morning, and his cute little face, this cute little year 7 boy, and I was almost in tears with him. I was useless. I just, I was completely useless. And I just said, "Oh, it's okay. I'll take you to Miss So-and-so who can help you." Because I was like, kind of thing. But I really feel for the safeguarding leads out there, because, they hear some awful stuff. They deal with some awful stuff. And I suppose that's when supervision is really important for them.
It is. I'm not. I'm not sure that supervision is necessarily the right word, but teaching is about the only profession that works with vulnerable people, or teachers, I should say, who don't, as a matter of course, have supervision or professional reflection. The kind of symptoms that you were talking about there, where I'm not sure if this is the right analogy, but it's some in my mind, it's something about kind of barnacles gathering on the hull of a ship. One little one small piece of distress that you're having to pick up from a child, or although upsetting at the time, is fairly minor, is fairly inconsequential, but that accumulates over time, and I think there can be some really traumatic things that some of our colleagues are having to carry and having to deal with. And
Yeah.
again, as part of our professional training, teachers aren't taught about form and how to respond. But it's not across the board, and it tends to be a bit retrospective rather than necessarily initial teacher training. And again, I think we need to look at a whole system review that just says, what is it that people need? Is a year or two sufficient, or how do we make sure that we build in ongoing CPD for staff? I don't know of a school that doesn't provide CPD, but it isn't statutory and it isn't expected. Sorry, it isn't a statutory thing, and therefore I think we miss out, and ultimately children and families miss out, because teachers don't get trained to do some of these essential things.
Yeah. And it seems, well, like I said, 20 years ago, there was, it was almost like a village that was supporting the child, and the school, okay, the school was the village, but there was the outskirts of the village as well that could support the school to support the child, and now it's all been taken away. So it's all on the school, and I think when I was teaching, whenever I watch the news or something, and they say, well, schools need to do more, it was like, how much more? How much more can schools do with less?
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? A little bit like a sandcastle with tide coming in, that there's more water surrounding it. No, this is probably not a great analogy, but my point is, I suppose, that the more pressures that schools are put under, the less resources we are given to help address some of those problems. And therefore, understandably, some of our colleagues will be, kicking back against that. Well, we're not social workers. Well, our job is to do this. Now we're not supposed to do that. And I have some sympathy for that. But again, I think we need to look at the systems that just say, so what is it that this community needs? What is it that our society needs? And how do we allocate resources that are never going to be enough, but actually reduce some of the pressure on those frontline teachers?
Yeah.
When we were chatting yesterday, Malarvilie, you said that you were meeting teachers in Spain who are significantly less stressed than teachers you
I
met
said
in the
what?
UK. You said that teachers you've met in Spain are
Mm.
less stressed than
Yeah.
teachers in the
Yeah.
UK.
And I think part of it is the workload is much less. Um, somebody said to me the other day, would you consider going back to teaching? And I burst out laughing because I think back to when I was a head of department and I probably had 3 frees or something, or probably 2 frees. So it's a full on timetable. And the thought of doing a full timetable now, I don't know how I did it. And with a subject like history, I know we always say things like this, but like a subject like history, where there's so many essays and so much marking to do, but you've got so many classes. So like with English, I'm not saying that it's worse for us compared to English teachers, but with English they might have 5 classes. I mean, one year I had 17 classes. I mean, that's crazy. And if you're teaching RE as well, it's even more. So because you only see them once a week, that's an awful lot of kids. It's that's a lot of planning, that's a lot of marking, that's a lot of dealing with issues with the kids and parents. That's a huge amount of children. And I look at the teachers in Spain, and I've gotten to know a few here, and they're like, oh yeah, it's pretty chilled. We don't have as many classes. We don't have, the workload is so much less. Our evenings are our own. I mean, it might be just where I am because every district, like Valencia, is a whole district. I didn't realise how huge it was as a kind of like the equivalent of a county, like Dorset County. It's quite big, and so they have different kind of, a bit like states in America, different rules compared to like Madrid or something. So it might be a bit different, but generally the system's very different over here.
I hesitate to step into the turf wars between history teachers and English teachers,
Oh,
but I'm sure I can hear
you were a
some.
PE teacher, weren't you?
Originally, I taught
Originally.
special needs,
Oh,
and then I drifted into some
yeah.
geography and some modern languages and that kind of stuff, and loved it. I
Yeah.
was just thinking, I wanted to go back almost to your point a few moments ago about the support or the pressures on our safeguarding leads, and recognize, I think, also that it has always been thus, but now because of the pandemic and the extraordinary pressures on schools, I was talking to a school recently who said they've got 40% of the staff out on one day, and you never know who's going to be in school the following day. I really wanted to kind of take the opportunity to say thank you to them for the extraordinary service that they've given. When lockdown started, when the pandemic started, Professor Becky Francis, who's chief exec of the Education Endowment Foundation, talked about teachers being the fourth emergency service. And although we're reflecting on systemic failures, such as the tragic death of the child you've been talking about, I think we also need to recognise that teachers have just been awesome in the way that they have continued to support, continued to teach, continued to support each other, and maybe as that those kind of darkest days at the end of November are now past, and Christmas is just about within sight, or at least within staggering distance. Maybe now would be a good time just to thank and congratulate and to praise those extraordinary teachers who continue to motivate and engage and inspire children on a day-to-day basis. I think it is very easy to to reflect on just how demanding the job is, how exhausting the job is, how exhausted our people are, and of course our leaders as well in school. I mean, but actually the fact that they are still standing, still turning up, still making a difference is just phenomenal, and we should thank and congratulate them.
Absolutely. I mean, I was in complete awe of my kids' teachers last year. During the pandemic, at one point it was hybrid learning. One minute they were in school, next minute they were at home doing these lessons. And the teachers always had a smile on their face, welcoming our kids into the school, always looked happy. I mean, they the amount of pressure that they've been under to do so much in such a short amount of time, yet for the kids they didn't show any of that, and it was incredibly impressive.
It was,
So
and it is,
yeah,
and
yeah,
continues to be so. Not helped. Let's open the Ofsted box for a moment. The School Inspection Service, who continue now to come into schools and subject schools to
I do not,
extraordinary
I
levels of
just
pressure.
cannot understand this. I cannot understand how Ofsted can go into a school that might have half the staff off or half a whole department off due to COVID, kids off left, right, and centre, staff under so much pressure. You know, I mean, I know during this time of year, I remember being in charge of cover during the winter term. Oh my God, that was the biggest stress I've ever had. The amount of cover I did personally was unbelievable because there was just nobody else. Or I was like, actually, I can't make that, they'll break. If I give them another cover, they'll break. I'll do it, kind of thing. And that's where we've got the flu season. We've also got what's it called? Omicron. I didn't learn Greek. Omicron,
Something like that. But yeah,
something like that.
current
You got
variant.
all that going on top of all the other stress going on, and you just think, how can they look at themselves in the face and go into a school and judge them? It's different if they were going in and said, look, I'm not doing anything. I've got a DBS. I can support you, or I can coach you, or I can do going in. That's what schools need: extra hands, extra
Yeah.
support. You know,
Well, it's curious,
I
isn't it?
just,
I will confidentially between the two of us, Melly,
oh yeah, nobody
admit
else
that
listening.
that's okay then. I trained for Ofsted many years ago,
Oh, the dark
and
side.
well,
No, I shouldn't talk like that. No,
we're
there's a
all
lot of
allowed a little
lovely.
flirtation
To be
here.
honest, I have had some really good Ofsteds where it felt like CPD. It sounds awful, sounds weird, but it felt like CPD. The Ofsted and the main Ofsted inspector was brilliant. And it felt like I was getting mentoring on how to improve the school. It was just, yeah, it was really good. So when it's done like that, it's brilliant. But I've also had the, kind of like where they're just interrogating you and just don't support you and then just make their judgments kind of thing. And it's harrowing. It's pretty awful. But what were
The
you going to
turning
say?
point.
You dabbled with the
So
dark side.
everybody's allowed a little flirtation with the dark side. I
Well,
defend myself. No, the turning point for me was a conversation I had with somebody. Said, I was really looking forward to supporting schools. And they said, no, this is not about supporting schools. This is about judging schools. And I thought, oh my
what?
goodness. Well,
Oh, well.
that's what
Yeah.
Ofsted are there for. It
And
is
well, we
about
all know
judgment.
this, but
Yeah. And again, I think we then, as a country, we need to look at an education system that is probably not fit for purpose. Well, we've got a judgment system, and I'm not saying that schools should not be inspected, but as you alluded to, I think it's that balance between inspection and judgment and support, where if something isn't working right, then, I take my car to the garage, they said, mate, your car has failed its MOT. Oh, that's not so good. But actually, what we can do is then help you fix it. That sounds like good news to me. So we need to
Yeah.
make sure that schools are fit for purpose and that things are being done as well as they should be and correctly. But surely it's not just about, and that's where the MOT analogy breaks down, I suppose. It's something about it's not just about judging that, but it's then about saying, and this is what we can now do to help you fix that, to continue to improve outcomes for children and for staff, of course.
Yeah. I think sometimes, and this is where consultants get a bad rap, schools get a consultant in to do that. And I'm speaking as a consultant myself, but I'd never go in now. I mean, I've been out teaching 4 years now. I'd never go into a judge a school. I'd never do that anyway. But even though I was responsible for teaching and learning all those years and CPD and so on, I would never run CPD for training teachers now, because I feel like I've been out of the game way too long. You have no idea about raise and shine and all that malarkey. But but the
I
problem,
think it's a breakfast cereal, isn't it?
yeah,
I
but
could be out of touch.
yeah, just a tad. But it's just another word for something we all used to do in the past, like retrieval practice. I was looking into it and I was like, you mean assessment for learning? That's basically what it is, just checking they understand and then going back to it. And I'm like, but there's whole books on this, we've been doing it for years. Anyway, sorry, anyone who's really into
I
it.
think there's a few
It's
people
basically the
foaming at
same
the mouth,
stuff. Yeah, probably, but it's just, I remember when I started 20 years ago, people were saying that to me. People that had been around for a long time were like, oh, it will come round again at some point. And whilst teaching, I saw it. Certain things come back, like SMSE. That was a big thing 20 years ago. Then it turned into something else. Then it came back again. And it was like, these things come round, don't they? So I completely forgot what I was saying before I had a rant. Oh, yes. Right. I was talking about consultants. The problem is when they get a consultant that hasn't been in schools for 20 odd years, and they're part-time Ofsted inspectors, and then they come in and they give you advice that you're looking at that isn't up to date. And you're like, how much money did the school spend on you? It's just, and that's happened to schools I've worked in several times where I'm like, this is not useful at all.
That's tricky for me because I haven't actually taught full-time in school and since, 1995.
Wow.
So,
That's a different century.
in every sense of the word. But I have been in schools or with schools every day, every working day since, and in dozens and dozens of schools. And although I haven't taught full-time in a school, I would still think of myself as knowing schools pretty well. And I suppose the stuff that I support around personal social health education or our relationships and sex and health education is something that people haven't had initial teacher training in. For many years now, we haven't provided very much CPD around that kind of stuff. And I think there's a real need. I think for me, the difference is, Mal, that it's less about then going in and judging schools or kind of sucking on your teeth and saying, oh, well, you've got some problems here and it will only cost you 10 days of my time to come in and fix it. But it's actually to be supporting the school to say, what's working well? What are some of the challenges you have? And how do we help to improve that? As you were having your little rant about inspectors and consultants and so forth, I was smiling to myself as a slim and curly-haired young PE teacher. I think my first year of teaching, I remember we had this guy came in, and for some reason it used to really infuriate me that he never put his arms in the sleeves of his jacket. He just did it draped over his shoulder. I don't know why that used to bug me so much, but it did. But the point was, he used to sit there and said, "Don't have any answers." But
Right, you're kind of coming in and out. Are you sitting still? Are you sitting still?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, because you're kind of gurgling in and out a bit.
Oh, gurgling is my best look. Oh, I'm really sorry. No, I'll be keeping.
Okay. The last thing I heard was curly haired. Right, we've got Jenny here who says, "Ha."
That was a long time ago. In
You
every
know
sense.
you've been a teacher a while when you start to say things like that. I remember in my 20s hearing the teachers saying, "We did that in the 80s," and rolling my eyes. I'm now that teacher. Right, what were you saying, John?
I was talking about a guy who used to come into school. I think he was some sort of consultant or inspector or something. And it used to really bug me that he never put his arms in the sleeves of his jacket. And I don't know why that got to me so much. But he used to sit there and say things like, "I don't have any answers, but I do have a lot of interesting questions." And I just wanted to throttle the guy. I was just furious. Just give me some blooming answers here. I need some help here. And now I spend my time asking interesting questions.
Yeah, I was thinking that sounds like coaching. He was ahead of his time.
Well, do you know the other my favourite story about that? My mum was a reception class teacher, teaching 5-year-olds, and I knew therefore that the rest of us were only ever playing catch up, because she convinced me very early on, we need to get it right from the beginning, and of course we do. She met my dad, who was also a teacher, and they met immediately at the end of the Second World War, and they were emergency trained, they called it. There was a 2-year teacher training program. And my mum told a story that one of her lecturers told her, so this would be 1946, 47, something like that. And she said, "Why should you never chase after a blonde, with or without the E, a number 19 bus, or a new education initiative, because there'll be another one along in a minute." And I think that notion of we go through cycles and spirals of, this has been the flavour of the month, this is something we're hoping to do, and it comes back to bite us, or come back to revisit in a slightly different format. I guess it was always the way. So we need to embrace that. We need to move forward. We need to, teachers need to continue to do the fantastic things they do for children and young people.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's almost Christmas.
Yeah.
You sound like you're looking forward to it.
Well, I am. I'm very lucky. I have a wonderful wife. We have 2 lovely kids. We have a nice home. And I'm just conscious that Christmas should be, whether you celebrate it as a religious festival or not, should be just a lovely time for families. But I suppose also, every TV ad, every magazine thing, everything you see on the internet, it's all about consumerism, and that troubles me a little bit. But it's also, we're all supposed to have a huge turkey and a fire and just lovely, lovely stuff. And we know for so many children, young people, and families, life isn't like that.
No,
The
I have
stress
to
and
say I hated Christmas. I absolutely detested Christmas because it was 2 weeks at home with my family and I did not like them.
come off the
This is
fence.
as a child. This was as a child. I did not like a lot of my family that I was stuck in a house with for 2 weeks. I mean, I loved the summer because you could just, in the 70s and 80s, you just went out and didn't come back till it was dark, So that was great. But yeah, I mean, Christmas was always traumatic for me. I absolutely detested it until I had my own kids. And even when I was a teacher, when I first became a teacher 20 years ago, I hated the holidays because I wasn't around people. And work gave me somewhere to go and be around people, if that makes sense. It sounds like, such a sad, poor Malarvilie. I have to remember what my name is now. And yeah, but we have to remember that. I mean, when lockdown happened, there were certain people I was supposed to be doing a group coaching session and I ended up coaching staff individually because they were all over the shop, and some of them that were in the worst state were because they lived on their own. They went to school, were basically on their own, in the classroom because they couldn't mix with anyone else, and then went back to their empty flat. And in terms of mental health, that was rough. That was really rough, and yeah, and I just think that we need to be aware of that. And it's something that I remember somebody put on Twitter the other day, I don't know, last week or something, when they were talking about, this brings us right back around to Arthur, talking about safeguarding training and how it needs to come with a trigger warning. And I remember, because I went to the Institute of Education, and their lecture hall holds about 1,000 people, and me and my mates used to sit at the back. So there were a couple of times. There were a couple of times where I led the charge to just walk out in disgust. But this particular time, we weren't told this is what our lecture was going to be on. It was going to be on, what did we used to call it? Child protection. It was going to be on child protection. And the stuff they were talking about should have come with a trigger warning, because I sat there, and I've not made any secret of the fact that I had a very difficult childhood. And I sat there and I felt like there was a massive spotlight on me. My best mate was sitting next to me and just held my hand because she knew straight away that this is not going to be good for you. And this was in the days when I'd never spoken about it, really, apart from to my best friend. Probably spoke to about 2 different people about it in my entire life. And when they were talking about all kinds of abuse and the language around it, some of the language I'd never heard before. And it was like putting a name to things that had occurred in the past. And that, to have that happen when you're sitting in a hall with 1,000 other people, it's quite upsetting. And I was upset for days and days afterwards, and it's something that initial teacher training people need to think about, because we don't, teachers don't come from the typical, not all teachers come from the typical stable, lovely middle-class backgrounds. To be honest, I worked in London. Most people I knew weren't like that until the Teach First came in. But they need to be aware of that teachers have their own traumas. They've come from difficult backgrounds themselves. So I don't know how we came about talking about that.
Well,
but,
just to rewind for a moment, Mal, when you were talking about the needs of teachers, there's a brilliant book called The Human Givens by 2 British psychologists, Joe Griffin and Ivan Terrell. And it talks about 9 things that we all need as humans. And I've used it as a training exercise with a number of schools and colleagues. Just a really interesting perspective about saying that we need to recognize the needs that we have and that the children we teach have, and recognizing and understanding that. And if those needs aren't met, it is devastating. And we need to really kind of get that, not just at an intellectual level, but as you say, as a kind of visceral level, that just says, geez, that's when that student is playing out or acting up. Our language is so important, isn't it? If I get you on the radio, so I got a kid kicking off, you march down with one set of expectations. If I say I've got a student in distress, it changes the whole nature of the way we look at the things. But when we've got young people who are displaying disruptive behavior or acting out, or however we wish to describe it, the needs that they will have will be so huge that they will do anything. We talk a little bit about attachment, for example. Oh, yes, it's a bit of fluffy. No, attachment is about life and death. I could go on, but it's that level, and that's where we need our teacher training to equip teachers with the skills and the knowledge, and then the tools to be able to help address that, to get them to be able to work effectively with children. And the things that you were just saying then, my heart goes out to you, because that must have been incredibly hard to sit in a lecture theatre and have some of those things described back to you. How did you, apart from feeling upset, how did that influence your professional development or your professional thinking?
I think it, more than anything, it influenced me in terms of CPD, which brings us up to Amjad's in the studio. Welcome, Amjad. In terms of CPD, I made sure I was very aware of the reasons why we're doing this. So, for example, with PSHE, there was a lot of backlash about it when I was introducing certain schemes of work. And so I did a whole school inset on it, talking about the figures, the statistics of drug abuse and young people that may not get pregnant with us, but as soon as they leave, within a couple of years, they get pregnant, and so on. So I made sure that people understood the why, and I made sure that I gave trigger warnings, and I still do that. Like with my radio shows, I give trigger warnings on the show a couple of weeks ago on racism. I put a trigger, because when you see something and you're not expecting it, and it like I just, with the whole racism thing with the cricketer, when he was talking about being called the P word, just hearing that. I mean, my little boy was playing Pac-Man and he ended up using the P word because he was just, he's only 5 and he didn't know. And he used the P word, and it was so kind of hearing it from a different room. I sort of went in and just went, oh, let's not use that word, eh? And they're like, why? And I'm like, oh, it's a rude word. They're like, oh, okay. And I was like, it's fine. And my other half was like, what word was that? And I said it, and he was like, oh, who is using that? What's that? And I was like, it's all right, kind of thing, and it just, but when you suddenly hear it, I mean, Amjad's in the studio. Amjad, I know we're here to talk about, welcome, by the way. You've been threatening. Morning. You've been threatening to come onto my show for so long.
I know, I'm really sorry. I'm here now. Yeah.
No, don't worry.
Thank you for having me.
No, don't worry. We're just talking about things that can trigger things, and I was saying that my little boy was talking about Pac-Man and gave Pac-Man a little nickname that is a word that me and you wouldn't appreciate.
Okay, yeah.
Or many people wouldn't appreciate.
Yeah.
And so I had to have a little word say, oh, that's a rude word, so let's not use that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering how you felt when that whole stuff with the cricket and the racism, all that came out. I know you said we're not going to go deep today.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd hit you with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that still fascinates me is that people only assess things through their own lens. And so lots of people will say to me, Amjad, you played a lot of sport, you played high level sport. What was it like for you? I'm like, are you asking me what was it like for me compared to you? Or are you asking me what was it like for me? Because they're two different questions. And people find those quite difficult to understand. I said, because if I tell you what was it like for me compared to you, you'll judge my experience as an isolated incident compared to your experience, because you'll say, actually, it wasn't like that for me. It was all right for me. It was no problem. But if I say, actually, no, this is what it was like, what do you make of that? So it's the whole cricket thing has been fascinating because lots of people have come forward and said, we've lived through this and we've talked about this and nothing has happened. But I think lots of people, and it's kind of reflective on lots of situations. So the Sarah Everard situation, where lots of men were saying, is it really that bad? Because again, they were looking at things through their own lens. So I think people need to understand and accept that other people have experienced and lived through things. And therefore we need to take a step back and say, right now, this isn't about me. This is about understanding about you. And then moving forward in that way.
Yeah,
It is,
absolutely.
Isn't it? That's the way it's got to be.
Yeah.
And therefore that's about listening and recognizing our own privilege or privileges, whether because we are white and male or whether because we are teachers. We need to recognize that other people's lived experience would have been quite different, and we need to be empathic. And then instead of just wringing, and I know none of us are just wringing our hands, but then saying, actually, as you were saying, Amjad, what is it we can now do about that? I've had my eyes open. I've been listening to this. how do we start to put this right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right, John, you're coming in and out again. So
I'm
I
so
just
sorry.
no, don't worry.
I'll turn off
but
my microphone. Lovely to chat to you, Malarvilie. I know
yeah,
I'm going to
great to
look
talk
forward
to
to
you.
listening to the two of you in conversation. So thank you so much. Good to speak to you. Take care,
All
Amjad.
right.
Nice to see you
Cheers,
again.
John.
Take care. See you
Take
later.
care.
Bye,
Cheers.
John.
Bye. Amjad,
Hello.
welcome. Sorry to
Thank
hit
you.
you with such a serious question straight away.
It's serious slash real life, isn't it? That's what it is.
Yeah,
It's not. It's
yeah,
nothing. It's nothing new. It is
yeah.
what it is. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
that I think that's been the upsetting thing. It's nothing new,
Mm-hmm.
and like it all comes back round again, and you're like, oh, when's this ever going to end?
It's the desensitizing to it as well. It's that
Yeah.
idea of, well, I'm not surprised. It's not a wow, and it's the same way, like I said, in terms of the intersectionality of this situation. In terms of, for example, a female saying, well, actually, like, why did you not notice? And then the kind of crossovers between a female and a black female. So there's a report recently that was published that £17,000 less on average is earned by female leaders. And then
Wow. Yeah.
if you break that down further, is that just white female leaders? Is that black female leaders? Like how does that kind of equip and equate to other areas as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we're here to talk about great CPD. First of all, did you always want to be a teacher?
To be honest, my background, it kind of through my upbringing, no one went to university around in my family. My core friendship group, only one or two people went to university. So the kind of idea of a professional kind of job was just that ambitious dream that your parents have. You could be a doctor, you should be a lawyer, you should be this. And it wasn't never ever in reach. So in terms of being a teacher, in one capacity, yes, I've always worked with children. So I was a play worker from 17, youth worker, and then I worked in young offender institutes, and then I did my teacher training. So I've always worked with young people, and in
Yeah.
a way, I've always taught. There's always lessons to be taught in terms of life lessons and moral lessons. So I guess so, but I didn't really sort my life out enough to understand what it meant by wanting to be something when you grow up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think many people just kind of fall into it, don't they?
Yeah, and I think what's important is to, when asked, do you always want to be a teacher? In my viewpoint, it's always good to never start by saying, well, actually, I wanted to do this, but I fell into teaching, in the sense of it was my backup or my secondary thing. I think it's okay to say, I learned that actually this is something that I want to do, and this is something that I want to be involved in. But it kind of, for me, being a teacher was so out of reach and grasp. It was never something that could be achieved. So therefore, I would never have thought about wanting to do it.
Yeah.
So it was like I was never taught by anyone that looked like me, anyone that was like from my area, or anyone that could have made me feel like actually you can also be here.
Yeah. And that's quite interesting that because I wasn't really taught. I mean, I don't know, because I grew up in East London and actually in secondary school I had a lot of teachers who were from all different backgrounds, but never from the same background as me. But it did, my history teacher was amazing. He looked like Shaft. Do you remember Shaft?
Yeah. I do, yeah.
And he looked like him, Mr. Edwards. He was so cool. And he just walked past me one day when I was in year 9 and just said, options are coming up. Are you thinking about taking history? And I shrugged my shoulders and he was like, I think you should. You did all right in that test. And I was like, okay. That's the only reason why I took it. I did history. I ended up being a history teacher for 20 years. But because that teacher gave me a bit of attention.
That's it. And it's that whole idea of, success breeds more success. So somebody told you, actually, you could be successful at this. You know
Yeah.
what? I want a bit more success. Then let's do this.
Yeah.
That's the single most important thing in education. Get your students to be successful. And I know that it's more complex than it sounds, but you'll never hear a student that turns around and says to you, you know what, sir, I love your lessons. I work really hard in your lessons. I can't understand a thing in your lessons. Like, what? So you'll never hear that, but you might hear, sir, I like you. I really enjoy your lessons, but I don't understand a thing in your lessons. That's why I don't really like your class.
Yeah.
It's nothing personal. I just don't get it. And
Yeah,
therefore, they're not
I
seeing
had this
success.
kid. I still remember this kid saying, "Miss, I really like you. You're great." And I was like, "Oh, cheers." And he goes, "But I really don't like history."
Yes.
And I was like, "What?" I was wounded. But
You
he's like,
can't,
"But
you
you're all
can't,
right."
yeah. You can't help but take it personal.
Yeah.
But it's like the same way students that I teach that will come up to me say, "Sir, I love English." I'm like, do you really love English? They're like, "Yeah, I love it." I'm like, "What do you love about it?" "Oh, so I love your lessons." I'm like, "So do you love the fact that you're doing well in English right now? Is that what you love?" And they're like, no, I love English. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's keep it at that. But the reality is that they're like, actually, I could do all right at this subject. I could do well in this class. Therefore, suddenly this lesson becomes my favorite lesson. Even if they've
Yeah.
had no relationship with you previously or prior to that, they'll still love that lesson. So the
Yeah.
success element is really important.
Yeah. And I think that is probably especially true in the type of schools we've worked in. So, in areas where there's higher deprivation, where self esteem isn't as high, and like you say, where they don't have that role model within their families. Like me and you were probably the first in our families to go to university.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
not having those role models makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget the first time I did coursework at university. So I did a law degree, and I'd only ever completed A levels that were modular examinations. So I'd never really done coursework before. I got 11% in my first assignment, and I thought I was all right at law. That's why I'm studying law. Like I did A level law, and the lecturer said to me, "Where's your bibliography?" I was like, "Bibli what?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, what's one of them? He was like, "What about your footnotes?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "I don't know what footnotes are. What do you mean footnotes?" But like nobody had gone through that, and I couldn't go home and talk to my mum or dad about it. Dad,
Yeah.
I got like put in some footnotes. Like, do you know what this is? No, just work hard. You know, our parents are great, but they would just say, study harder. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm meant to be studying to study harder. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's that support that's absolutely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have to give a shout out to your website, Try This Teaching.
Thank you, thank you.
Many years ago, I mean, 8 years ago, I mean, I've been on Twitter, like 11 years now, but I remember following you a long, long time ago, and there was some tweet you put out about questioning, and I thought, oh, I'm going to try that tomorrow. And it really true was the next day in school, I tried it, and it was brilliant, and it just stayed a part of my, and there was loads of stuff you put out like that, that I was like, oh, it made a difference to my teaching actually. And
Great.
and I think it's that sort of thing. I kind of lament that it's disappeared. It's disappearing off Twitter, and maybe it's my timeline or whatever. But I think it really is fantastic. What do you think? There are different forms of CPD, but what do you think makes great CPD?
To be honest, I thought long and hard about this. I think anything that makes our teaching more efficient and effective is essentially great CPD. And if you think about kind of any real strategy or any real piece of research or evidence or kind of practice that's put out there, is all about streamlining what we do, how we do it, when we do it, and what we don't do. So great CPD should be about taking the things that we do day in, day out, which we repeat day in, day out, and thinking about how can we construct these repetitive actions and mind frames and situations into a way that could be really efficient and effective. And that varies for various people, obviously. And
Yeah.
about the thing about good CPD is sometimes there's such a huge kind of variance in what does CPD include? Some people want academic papers and journals and research to really dig deep into. Some people just want really low effort, high impact, effective strategies that they can try, refine, and place into their lessons. And I think the reality is that good CPD should involve anything that makes what we do day in, day out more efficient and effective. And sometimes we overcomplicate it, and sometimes we try to make it a lot more difficult than it is, when the reality is that teachers are busy. We all know that. Nobody's got time to do more. So what we're actually asking you to do is think about what you're doing. How can you slimline it and actually do what you're doing in a more efficient and effective way?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, because like you say, there's a lot of stuff I hear about teaching and learning at the moment that I'm like, but isn't that just there's a lot of stuff that I'm like, but isn't that just teaching? That's just normal teaching, but they put all these fancy words around it, and as though it's, you know, rocket science or something. And I get a bit frustrated by that, because
It's the
they make
same
it
thing,
sound
yeah.
more complex than it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the term differentiation, the term scaffolding, the term, all of these kind of terms, when you break them down, ultimately, they're as old as teaching themselves. They're as old as what we do. And hence why my whole website, trythisteaching.com, was designed around 12 years ago, in a couple of schools ago, where I said to all teachers, if we put together one idea, and this was back in the day of Blogspot, I said, if we all place one idea as a post, there's 110 of us, we'll have 110 ideas, and we could all share each other's ideas. Only about 10 teachers ended up putting an idea, so I ended up just putting 100 ideas up myself, and then it just kind of just expanded. And the amount of teachers that have said, oh my God, I tried that really simple, really straightforward idea, and I put that in place in my lesson, and thank you. I'm like, no, there's nothing to thank. All you've done is you've taken something that you do day in, day out, and you've either streamlined it or you bulked it up. And that's the most important thing. And I think the best thing about, and I share this whenever I deliver CPDs, is the best thing about ideas are we don't have to use them. So don't get offended by them. If somebody shares an idea that you think, well, that sounds like a load of nonsense, just don't use it. Simple as that. Just go, all right, cool, thanks for that, and off I go. It's a bit like if I'm scrolling through my TV and I see a program and I think, that looks pants, I don't get angry about it. I just skip on. I just go to the next show and just watch something else.
Yeah, and that's what I don't understand, the rage that I see on Twitter sometimes when somebody puts something out, and then there's like this pylon of people having a go at this poor person that's just shared a resource, saying what a pile of whatever it is, you know. And I just think, well, it might not work for you, but it works for them. And isn't the ultimate goal that the students benefit? The ultimate goal is the student outcome. So how you get there isn't as important as the outcome.
Yeah, and I always we've all heard the phrase, know your students, right? So I've added a little bolt onto that phrase, which is know your students, not just students. So what I mean by that is, don't just read an idea or a book or a blog or listen to a podcast and think that will apply. Know the students that you're trying to apply that to. So that means contextualizing and personalizing and drawing reference. So, you know, as a qualified Senko, once you taught one child with autism, you've taught one child with autism. So if somebody puts an idea out and goes, this is great for my autistic children, it might well be great for your autistic children, but it doesn't mean it will. So apply it by knowing your students, not just students as a mass collective now.
Yeah, and I think that seems to be an issue as well. Like we've talked about racism, we're talking about differentiation and so on, but this idea of, oh, this is seeing people as a whole group, you know, saying that, oh, this will work for them, or this is how they feel. Well, no, that's not how I feel. Because like with racism, coming back to that, I can tell you my lived experience, but that is different to my own brother's experience, even though we're in the same family, you know.
And I recall years ago, you and I haven't agreed on previous situations around kind of viewpoints on things, but it's about knowing that you can still have those constructive conversations without
Yes.
getting into sledging and slanging matches.
Yeah.
I do firmly believe, though, that Twitter for me personally is not a place to debate. Twitter for me personally is not a place where I will get into discussions with people, because the nuance is lost, emotional literacy in
Yeah.
terms of understanding how those words should come across is lost. So personally, even when I know categorically that I'm right, which obviously in my head is all the time, I just say, thank you for your opinion. Have a great evening. And I just leave it at that. And I
But
try
you
to be,
didn't used to be like that.
no, I didn't. And the thing is, and I guess that's a bit growing up as well, a bit of growing up
Yeah.
as well. And I think that's a bit of losing kind of my original kind of background, in terms of you'd never back down from a situation. You'd always stand up and front it. But then the more you learn, the more you grow up, and the more you see those older guys when you were younger in a club just walking away from a situation and going, you know what, my bad, I apologize. And you go, look at them. And then you realize actually there's a reason why they're doing that. And there's a reason why they're far more mature and far more understanding than I am right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Anything else you want to say about great CPD?
I think the good thing about CPD is that we need to remind ourselves that we have to pace ourselves with CPD. And the problem with Twitter especially is that we will see and try to kind of engage with and process too much at too close a time period. So I always use the phrase one tweak a week, like a small adaptation in your practice a week. And whenever I deliver CPD, I always ask people to align their ideas into a short, medium, or a long-term plan. And the problem with online blogs and articles and podcasts, etc., is you'll go, that sounds great, that looks lovely, that looks amazing, that worked really well. And then you end up allocating your whole week to be doing those things. And actually they don't work like that. So just pace yourself, think of what you need to do to develop, and then address that as a weekly format. And if an idea doesn't work, just ditch it. The problem with ideas are when the ideas are attached to one's ego, and they're then told, or you're then associating your ego with the idea by saying, no, I must do this. This is what's going to work. Let it go. If it doesn't work, let it go.
Yeah. And that goes for leaders as well.
Absolutely. And that's where the ego comes in mainly, to be honest. You know, I've written a policy on this. This is my idea. I've worked hard on this. You should put this in place. But if your colleagues are feeding back, this isn't working, this is really not effective. And then if a leader then says, no, but we must do this. Why must we do this?
Yeah.
You know, what's the aim for this? So it's, you know, whereas if you disassociate your ego with that and go, you know what, I tried that, it didn't work. Let's think about something more efficient and effective.
Yeah. I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's the vulnerability of being a leader, is to be able to say, is this working? And to be able to hear, as much as it hurts, actually, it's not working, then it's really important to change it.
Absolutely.
Because what's the point in it? You know, because you're just wasting everybody's time and the kids aren't benefiting ultimately.
No, there you go. Yeah, without doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, Amjad, it's been great talking to you, and
you.
I'm sure I will badger you to come onto my show again.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure.
A bit more time. Okay.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Take
All
care.
right.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn.
The Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza, has warned the Prime Minister not to close schools in response to the Omicron variant, despite cases in the UK reaching 160. Speaking on the Andrew Marr show, she said, "Lockdown was a terrible time for the whole nation. It's also why I think we must not close schools again. We must not. I would urge the Prime Minister not to close schools. The children want things back to normal. They took a huge hit for us. We must not close schools again. and my head teacher colleagues across the country are incredibly good at managing this situation. I watch them rush to support the most vulnerable, and I would definitely advise not to do this if there is any other option. 280,000 children were recorded absent from school on November the 25th, 2.6% of all pupils in England. Wrexham Council have supported young leaders in a project called Healthy Minds Haven, which is designed to improve mental well-being in school communities. There will be an event on the 15th of December to which senior leadership teams will be invited, when they will learn how their school can become a Healthy Minds Haven. Interim Clinical Service Manager from North Wales CAMS, School InReach Service, Sophie Gorst, will speak about why she is supporting the campaign aim to improve mental health support for young people in schools. This has been your daily education news briefing.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, I'm Steve Woods, and this is 2 Minute Tech. Shortcuts are key combinations that allow tasks to be performed faster. You may be familiar with Control-C for copy and V for paste. Here's one that may just change your life. Did you know there's a shortcut for bookmarking a web page? When browsing the internet, you can quickly bookmark a page by holding down Control and pressing D. If on a Mac, it's Command and D. Once you press this key combination, you're presented with the option to save the page into your bookmarks. Now, that might not be the most earth-shattering revelation in your use of tech, but let's add a little more to the mix with an additional 3-key combination. Hold Control, Shift and press B. You can also now show and hide your bookmarks bar. On this bar, you can park your most common bookmarks. Again, on a Mac, replace Control with the Command key, Command, Shift and B. The bookmarks bar can speed things up, and you can arrange about 10 bookmarks by dragging them around. Now let's apply this to teaching and improving efficiency. Do you use multiple websites in different lessons and spend time opening them individually? Is your bookmarks bar cluttered, or do you drop hyperlinks into your presentations and then wait for them to open? Wouldn't it be great if you can open all your web pages in just a couple of clicks? Well, you can. When creating a bookmark, there's an option to make a folder. So while researching a lesson or topic, you can save bookmarks into one place using the wonderful Control-D. Here's the magic. If you right-click a folder and select Open All, guess what? All bookmarks in that folder open in new tabs ready for your lesson. So when you're planning, use Control-D and make a new folder. When you want them, all sites can almost instantly be on your screen and ready to go. Those shortcuts again. Control-D to bookmark, Shift Control-B for the bookmarks bar, and right-click Open All to open all bookmarks in a folder. If on a Mac, replace Control with Command. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome back. So, Dame Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, she's urging, on the Andrew Marr show yesterday, she said, urge the Prime Minister not to close school. I mean, it's not like he's quite trigger happy with closing schools or anything, but what's interesting, like on LinkedIn, I noticed that the headline was out and loads of people had tweeted saying, had message commented saying, absolutely, we mustn't close schools. And some of them were chief execs of schools, some were principals. And I thought, am I living in some kind of parallel universe? Because I think they need to close schools. You've got this the numbers are absolutely rife in the UK. Where I am in Spain, all the children from age 5 upwards wear masks at school. And everyone wears masks in the streets, and children wear masks in the streets, and so on. And you feel so much safer. I mean, when we were in the UK the last year, we hardly went out. And we didn't send our children back to school either because of the virus. And all of our children's friends ended up with the virus. And the idea of, was it 11% of children end up with long COVID? You just think you really don't want to risk that for your kids. That's how myself and my husband felt. We didn't want to risk that for our children. But we feel much safer here. But the idea that saying we must not close schools, I can understand in the sense of mental health and well-being, and some children, their lifeline is school. But at the risk of getting ill, I don't know, because at the end of the day, if the science says you need to close the schools, like it did last year, before Christmas, Gavin Williamson was threatening to, the former education secretary was threatening to sue schools, take certain schools to court because they were talking about closing their school a couple of weeks before Christmas. But during Christmas and after Christmas, those schools were completely vindicated because the kids went back to school first day back. My kids didn't. We didn't send our kids back. But the kids went back to school for one day, and that evening Boris Johnson announced the closure of schools, which ended up being for, I don't know, was it 6 to 8 weeks, something like that? They didn't go back until March or something. So are we expecting a deja vu? Is this going to happen all over again? Who knows? I was looking up on, just looking at different education systems around the world, really. And because 25% of our listeners are global, from around the world. And I was thinking about the different systems and how people choose what schools their children go to. And like I said, I grew up in East London. Every school I went to was across the road, literally across the road, from where I lived. Choice wasn't really a thing back then. And where I lived in a row of terraced houses, my parents had bought our house back in 1974 when I was 1. But next door was a council house, but you couldn't tell the difference between the two houses. And it was like that on our terrace street. Nice houses, but intermingled with council houses, but you'd never be able to tell. When I became a teacher, I became aware of this idea of choice, and people moving to certain areas to ensure their kids got into specific schools. And where I lived in Ealing in West London, in our square mile radius, we were surrounded by so many schools. We had the pick of fantastic primaries and secondary schools, so it wasn't a thing moving. Well, this is within Ealing. I mean, in the next borough in Hillingdon, a bit different, but and that's where I worked. Yeah, so you didn't really hear people moving to different areas for school because Ealing was around, so many good schools in Ealing. It was a bit of a shock moving to Bournemouth because one of the first things I noticed was at baby groups, all the parents were talking about was schools and being really anxious about which school their kids are going to get into. Some of our friends even sold up their houses in a lovely area and moved to a not very nice area where there happens to be a really good school. And I was also shocked that grammar schools still existed because in London they don't. And probably because mostly Labour boroughs, and Labour is very much against grammar schools. So I was really shocked that grammar schools is still a thing outside of London, and the fact that so many parents are spending so much money on tuition to pay for their children to try and get them into grammar school, try and get them to pass the 11 plus. So you've got parents who can afford it, who are spending all this money. But then these grammar schools are also single sex. So they're selective, they're single sex, and it tends to be parents that can afford their kids to have all this tuition sending their kids there. So I would say that's highly selective. And if you're thinking about the general population, if we sent our kids to the grammar school, they'd be mixing with a very tiny part of society. It wouldn't be like in Ealing. You'd have kids from affluent families sitting next to kids from very deprived families, but they're all wearing uniform, and there isn't that kind of divide. Before we moved to Spain, I thought I'd do, it's important to do a bit of research on the education system. I put a message out on a few expat Facebook groups asking which areas are good. And someone responded, there's no such thing as middle class. Not that I'd mentioned middle class areas, but I said, which areas are good for schools? And, they'd said, well, there's no such thing as middle class areas. All the schools are good. And I thought, well, that can't be true. But actually it is. All the schools are actually good. You do have international schools, British, American and German schools in where I live. You've got semi-private schools, which are called concertados. And what that means is, when it's semi-private, they're still state schools, but they sound like academies in that they're privately owned but funded by the government. So that sounds very much like an academy, like a UK academy school. You've also got public schools, which are basically state schools. And I assumed people would say, which shows how hierarchical it is in the UK. People say, "Oh, don't send them to public school," but they said, "Yeah, the public schools are good. The semi-private schools are good." And semi-private, as in the parents pay for things more, like trips and lunches and various equipment and various extra classes like music and that kind of thing. So it's not a huge amount. It's not like poor people can't afford this. And the other thing I noticed is that less affluent people aren't pushed out of areas. They make sure there's affordable housing in each area, and they have playgrounds and shops. So they don't just have huge amount of housing with no parking, no shops, no schools in the area. By law, they have to have a certain amount of schools in each area. The school day is pretty interesting in Spain. Primary school children go in from 9 till 12. Then they can have a 2.5 to 3 hour break. Then they're back in 3 to 5, which sounds completely alien to UK listeners, I bet. That 2.5 hour, 3 hour break is for lunch and for siesta, because it does get hot. I mean, we got sunburn the other day at lunchtime, and it's December. It's mad. It kind of feels weird. I'm not complaining though. And their school year is mid-September to mid-June. So they have about 10, 11 weeks for the summer. And I have to say, it gets to about 40 degrees in Valencia. So you don't want to be in a classroom then. I mean, every classroom I was in, that I've ever had was like a greenhouse, so hot in the summer. Quite often I'd take the kids out into the playground and we'd sit under a tree and do our lesson. It was way more productive than just kids falling asleep in the classroom from the heat, especially in the afternoon. So I find that quite interesting that year groups are age-based as well. So although the school year is September to June, they decide which kids are in which year based on the age, January to December. And it took me a while to get my head around that. How does that work? Because you're so used to a different system. But I'm excited about the kids starting in a Spanish school, actually, because they will learn Spanish. They will be surrounded by Spanish and other international children. Our neighbour is German, and neighbour's kid's friend popped round and we were all having a chat, and the boy who was 9 spoke French, German and Spanish and English. And he said, I only speak a little bit of English, but he was fine. I always find that funny when they say, I only speak a little bit of English, and they can hold proper conversations. So it's amazing. It's quite a melting pot where I am. I just want to say a big thank you to John Rees. Really interesting. Always a pleasure talking to John. Really good discussion on social services, and the run up to Christmas, and a big thank you to all the teachers that are working so hard during this unprecedented time. I haven't heard that in a while. Unprecedented time. And Amjad made it into my show. Yes, he's been threatening for 9 months, but he made it in, and it was great talking to Amjad. There's a lot of, it's interesting because, like he said, there was a lot of things we didn't agree with back in the day, but now quite a lot of our views are quite aligned, so that's good to hear. Okay, I think I'm going to do the news, one advert, and then I'll be signing
Need
off
support
soon
with
after
your
that.
phonics teaching? Did you know Oxford University Press now has 3 DFE validated programs to help you? Read Write Inc Phonics, Floppy's Phonics, and the brand new Essential Letters and Sounds. Essential Letters and Sounds will get all your children reading well, quickly, using phonics books you may already have in your classroom. Developed by the Knowledge Schools Trust English Hub, it's affordable, easy to use, and makes teaching phonics with letters and sounds more effective. Whatever your school's phonics needs, Oxford has the solution. To find out more and receive support from your expert local educational consultant, visit oxfordprimary.com/phonics.
Okay, so time to sign. I think somebody's just rung in. So I don't know what just happened there, but yes. Anyway, I'll be back next week. Next week we've got a cracking show coming up. We've got Elham Farhad. I hope I've said that correctly. Elham Farhad from Migrant Leaders coming in to talk to us about her work. This work is absolutely fascinating, and I think Catherine Grice will be joining her because they work together. Elham Farhad is the founder of this organisation, so that'll be fantastic. The week after that will be the 21st of December, and we'll have Jill Berry coming in talking about leadership. But the rest of the day we've got some fantastic shows coming up. We've got Libby, we've got Rebecca, I think. Or is it Lucy? I'm terrible. My brain has gone to mush now. So I'm going to sign off now. Have a great week, people. Live for the week, not just the weekend.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.